live with Ryan Dunn. What's up, man? Thanks for coming on.
Of course. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to get back into this.
Yeah, back into the podcast game here.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, dude. I know we were just saying like 120. So was it 127? Is that how many episodes you?
127 episodes. There was a few that remained in the can that were recorded but never aired. So it was, yeah, 127 released.
Man, over how many years? What, 3 years?
Yeah, two and a half, probably two and a half, almost 3 years going
Two and
on
a half, three
with that many
years.
episodes. Yeah.
That's a long time.
It was a grind. Yeah, it was a long time. It was a transition period in my life too. So it's like I had started a new job, was, in a new relationship, and was kind of kept that going through the whole thing. So
Yeah,
it was
yeah.
fun.
Transition period. Yeah. So you started. Did you start before you were in a relationship, or was it like you were
Uh,
in?
I must have started kind of right as I think I was starting to date this girl who is now my wife, who is now the mother of my child, all that stuff. I had just started this. I don't know if she knew that she was getting into business with a podcaster, but
A lot of
she
time.
stuck
Yeah, a lot
around,
of
so that's
time
good.
and that's great, man. That's awesome. So yeah, dude, I'm happy that we were able to connect, and I'm just excited to ask you, like, from my perspective, a lot about your experience with the podcast, but then also obviously you're a former college athlete. You played at Boston College, and I just in doing a little research, you walked on at Boston College.
Yeah, so I was a walk-on, like I'd call it, or they'd call it a recruited walk-on. So, I had, no scholarship or anything like that when I came to school, but kind of, had a relationship with the coaches. They were like, hey, we can, help move your application through the process and all that stuff. But it was kind of like, hey, you got a spot on the team, but there's no guarantees of scholarship or anything like that when I first arrived.
And then you just grinded it out from there. I
Just
mean,
grinded it
what
out.
was
Yeah.
what was that experience like playing in the
Yes,
ACC?
it was crazy. I mean, you show up your freshman year, and I tell everybody the story, but my mom was like, I don't even know if the coach knows your name. Like, if the head coach knows your name, I had probably had one conversation with the head coach. He's like, I don't know, like if he's even going to know who you are. Show up in the first freshman year, like I was getting bits of playing time here and there. I was kind of just getting thrown in, like, all sorts of different positions, and didn't, play a ton. And then come my sophomore year. I had had a good off season, like, was kind of still in the mix, but not really like had a clear cut role in the roster. And guy goes down the first game of the year, and I step in, and I played every single minute after that my sophomore year, and so it was kind of like off to the races after that. Um, and then, between my sophomore and junior year, they put me on scholarship, and it kind of kept rolling. But it was something that was like such an insane experience. Like, I've got guys now who I've played with, who played in MLS, who played in World Cups, who played at the national team level, and it's fun. The ACC is definitely kind of like the premier soccer league in the country for college soccer. And you watch the games on TV, and you're like, yep, okay, played against that guy, played with that guy's brother, know this guy, and so it was fun to kind of see from that level, as a guy who was like definitely not at that level at the time of kind of coming in, and sort of earned my stripes in that space. But yeah, it was an awesome experience, and like just loved every minute of Boston College, of playing college soccer, and it was just a great fit for me.
That's awesome, Boston College. Yeah, Boston College is a beautiful campus too. Chestnut Hill, right up
That's
there.
right,
Yeah,
Chestnut Thrill. Yep, we're doing good up there, so it's fun.
there
It's a,
you
it's a
go.
great
I
spot.
love it, man. Very cool. Yeah. That's awesome. So you didn't even really, well, not that you didn't anticipate playing for 4 years, but there was probably like, all right, you get that starting spot, like you said, and now you're in there and you're not going to give it up. Um, was it was it hard for you leaving soccer after that? Like were you just ready to hang it up once it was over?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I don't, my senior year, I was injured for part of the year, so it was one of those where I kind of didn't have like a full taste of like, okay, if this went well, like where could things go? And I don't think it was ever in my mind of like, oh, I could play professional soccer, and there's a lot of soccer all over the world, and you could probably find. I probably could have found a league somewhere in the world that would take me on, and maybe they're giving me $500 a month or something. But like, could have called myself a professional soccer player. But I did go to a couple like trials, kind of as a year or so out. Was still like had the itch to come and play soccer, and was playing in a high level men's league and things like that. And then over time you get a real job, and you're living in. I was living in Boston, and decided, hey, okay. Um, I've got a pretty good life, doing what I'm doing, and gave up sort of the like, okay, I'm going to continue playing professional soccer, but played 7v7 with my buddies, was playing still in like a competitive men's league, and so still got my fix of playing, but just not at an elite level anymore.
Yeah. There you go. Soccer's one of those things that you can play probably your entire life too. It's not like baseball. Well, there are guys that still play when they're like 60 or 70, but I'm like, I don't know if
It
people actually want to want to see that.
It is funny. We
Um,
like the league I play in. They're like they do have. We just saw for the first time, and they have an over 70 tournament. So we're like, okay, there are guys out there that are still
there are
kicking
guys that are
around at
still going.
70, which is crazy.
Yeah,
I don't know
that's
if my
interesting.
hips will hold up by then, but
Yeah.
we'll see.
Yeah, really. Oh my goodness. So well that's cool, man. Yeah, I played at Seton Hall, and yeah,
Hmm.
I think their soccer team's pretty decent these days, but
Yeah, yeah,
we yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's just cool, like having that experience and that background. And then I'm like, it's something that sticks with you, until you're forever. Like you're gonna go
yeah.
on and yeah, your career and everything like that. So
Still
um,
talk about it. You still reminisce. You're still like, oh, and it's amazing. I'm sure in baseball it's the same way. Like, I don't know if you had teammates that are like, well, I try not to say, if I didn't get hurt, this could have happened, or if so and so recruited me, I could have done this. Like, but there's guys love telling stories of their heyday and their playing days, and there's nothing better than that.
tell the war stories. Oh yeah, oh
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
Some tell them too much probably, but well, listen, man. So I'm so interested to hear about this the podcast that you started up. So what happened? So you started working, or no? I think I heard you say you weren't actually working when you started the podcast. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that is accurate.
Okay.
Yeah, I've had an on and off relationship, I think, with like creative side projects for a long time. I mean, uh, in college, I had started a blog and was, doing a blog in college, and then as I graduated, I was working at an ad agency, and I was doing this like daily newsletter that I was sending out to like all folks in the industry, and did that for probably every day for almost 2.5, 3 years. And so at a certain point, I was doing that. I started a travel blog for a while. That was even before the podcast. So I was traveling kind of all over the world, and did this travel blog for, again, probably, yeah, 2 or so years doing that. And then when I'd come back, I had met all these amazing people traveling, and they were writing books, they were starting their own businesses, they were doing all these cool things, and I was like, oh, this would be great. I'll interview these people and kind of like pull the learnings together for the blog that I like, the travel blog that I have. And as I did a couple of those, I was like, well, this is stupid that I'm trying to like transcribe this interview. Why don't I sort of turn it into more form of an audio podcast? And so that was kind of how the podcast was born. But it was not my first creative project, but I think it was the one that I kind of like stuck with and really like fell in love with the most.
Gotcha. So you always had an itch to do something a little bit different. It sounds like.
Yeah, I think I will always, I
No
don't know
pun
if that will,
intended.
yeah, I don't
Yeah.
know if that will
Yeah.
ever go away. But that was, constantly have been kind of like tinkering or coming up with little ideas that I like to, try and get off the ground.
Yeah. Yeah. So the original idea around that. So you were talking to people. Yeah, it was the blog that you were kind of or that you were transcribing the conversations.
Hmm.
Um, can you just share a little bit of what the idea was? Because I know it was broad, right? Like you were talking to all kinds of different people
Yeah, yeah. So
originally.
I initially, and the name was had stuck kind of from the beginning, but I called it Destination Different. And, the idea was destination. I had kind of pulled of like, okay, I'm traveling to all these different destinations and kind of met these people from all over the world. And it was people that were pursuing these kind of different, unconventional career paths. And so that was sort of the impetus for it, was like just people that were doing something that wasn't a 9 to 5 job. I had quit my job and had started doing this traveling, and had worked in a corporate environment for a while. And so my thought was like, okay, there's all these people that are creating these amazing lives and jobs for themselves. Let me learn how, selfishly, let me learn how they're doing it and try and figure out like how they're making it work. Um, and so that's kind of how it started, was like, let me talk to these people. And yeah, the first couple guests I had, if I think back to like the early episodes, the first guy, he had started a breathing seminar. He like went into the Wim Hof method, got all into that, and so he was doing that sort of work.
Hmm.
One of my early guests, she had started like a digital nomad course, so she was training people like, hey, here's how you can get a remote job. This was like before COVID, before all that. So she had started that. There was a girl that had started a clothing company, a champagne company. Um, and so I was just kind of like, how are you guys doing this? Like, what is, do you have another job? Like, what is your sources of income? How are you getting this thing off the ground? Like, who are you talking to make these things happen? It was really just like chasing my curiosity of like, okay, I've now tried a couple of these things to try and make something for myself. How are these people doing it? So that was really how it started.
It's yeah, it's awesome, man. So you, um, I'm just trying to think. So then because I know at a certain point, like I was just checking in on some of your episodes. I was looking back. So you did 127 of them, which is a ton. Oh, so I was gonna. So you started before COVID. Like I feel like you
Yeah,
saw a lot of these things pop up, and then it was almost like a creative project. But you started right before COVID. Did
yeah.
it change at all during that time period,
It
or
definitely
was it?
did,
Yeah.
in that it opened up more people that were doing like there was a girl that I had that was massive TikTok following, as stupid as it is. She had like gone viral about this song about a slug on her rug. That was like but she wrote these like catchy little jingles, and so that was like how she popped off. But that was like a COVID project where she's like, I just like writing little stupid songs. I've been doing it my whole life, blows up on TikTok and like had basically turned into a full time creator, influencer, and now like writes songs and is a songwriter. And so that was like a COVID thing where you're like, that would probably never happen if she hadn't been bored at home doing God knows what. And so, yeah, it changed a little bit just in terms of like who I was talking to on a day to day. But it also opened up my time too. I mean, previously I'd been in an office. I was, 9 to 5, going in every day, 5 days a week. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, 5 o'clock hits or 8 a.m. hits, and I can schedule an interview in, and or sneak it in the middle of the day or whatever around other people's schedules. It just opened up my flexibility a bit more too.
Yeah, yeah. So what were you doing? Like, what were you doing to prepare for these, and like, what kind of questions were you asking? Like, was it a direct interview, like bouncing questions, or did you make it more of a conversation?
Yeah,
That's something I've been thinking about.
I definitely took pride in my level of research. Like these people that some, especially as I started to go further in, like a little bit more established entrepreneurs or like, have a long history of creating content on the internet. Like there's a lot of stuff out there. And, you'd be amazed what a quick Google search or LinkedIn search or, you know, things like that can bring up. And so it was really trying to get like an exhaustive, like, okay, where did your interest start in this? How did you sort of get into where you are? And I always tried to get one or two questions in there that were like, how the hell did you know this about me? Like, I took pride in kind of trying to find something that was a little bit off the
Yeah,
rails. Um, and then yeah, I tried to keep it. I think the best interviews for me were the ones that felt a little bit more conversational, where I could kind of just chase my curiosity of like, how did you do that? Let's talk about this, and press people. I hope that the goal of the show is like giving some, if somebody else wanted to do that for themselves, of start a business or create content or whatever that might be, that they were getting some sort of value out of listening to the episodes.
yeah. I love it, dude. I love it. So you, how are you thinking about goals for the podcast? Because I was looking back through, I think it was your Instagram, and you
Hmm.
had it was like 10,000 downloads, but by the end of the year, or like certain things like that. Like so, because it looked like you might have had goals at one point, and I don't want to put the cart in front of
Yeah, yeah,
the horse here, but you had the goals, and then it seemed like along the way, not that you were like there were roadblocks along the way, but it's tough to keep going
yeah,
after, like you can get kind of beat down. And I've done 55 of these or so. And it's like, dude, to keep it going and to keep it churning out. So I guess my question is like some of those goals, how did you think about that and like keep yourself going for those episodes?
yeah. I honestly, I think being a college athlete, and maybe you'll think about this a little bit too. Like there was a sense of like it just is what I did. Like, it was like every week an episode comes out and every week there's a game, whatever it is. Like that was sort of part of my just like routine of like, okay, this is what I do. And I knew, I probably missed a handful of weeks where it was like, okay, it's Christmas or it's like, something that was sort of like a bigger obstacle. But for the most part, if I had a normal week, I did not miss an episode. And so I had a moment in time where I was like, I'm going to take a couple weeks off. I want to kind of think about the show. And that's kind of how the show ended, was like, You know,
I know. Yeah, it's just
you sort of take the foot off the gas, and then you're like, oh, okay, maybe I don't need to go back to it. I don't need to go back to it. And it's like, it's hard to get that ball turning again. And so I think for me, it was a little bit of just like, you keep the wheels going because that's like, you know, and so that was maybe just intrinsically like how I sort of thought about the show. But then goals wise, I think, you know, it's hard not to think, hey, there's guys getting $100 million deals podcasting now. Like, hey, is there something that I can create here that becomes a bigger business, that becomes something that I can do full time out, you know, I could leave my day job to go and do this. And so I think like selfishly, big picture, that was what I was thinking. And then, you know, as far as like setting goals, it was always, I think it changed as I went through it. Like early on, it was I mentioned like, you know, these are cool people. I kind of just want to like learn what they're doing. And then I think some point at the midway point, I was like, you know, there's something interesting here. Like, could I actually turn this into something? And that was like phase two of the goals. And then phase three was honestly just like I had a mindset shift a little bit that took me to, all right, it's hard to grind and really make an interesting podcast, but this has given me the opportunity to talk to amazing people. And I almost thought of it more as like a networking tool of, hey, this is now opening me up. It gives me a reason to go and talk to some random guy that I admire on Twitter and say, hey, I love your stuff. Can I talk to you on my podcast? Um, you know, if I was just some regular person, that guy's probably never talking to me. And so that I think was like the third phase was just like, hey, these are fascinating people that are doing really impressive things. Let me use this as a chance to talk to them. And if there are other benefits that come out of it, you know, money or sponsorships or, you know, it becomes a bigger thing, great. But, you know, I think I came back to reality again as after like riding the wave for a while and was like, hey, this is just a great chance for me to talk to cool people.
okay. So I got to ask you about that because that's where that's literally that's what I've been experiencing because
Yep.
I started up because I'm working from home, like working at good job,
Yep.
insurance, the whole thing. But I'm just like I feel like there's a way to maybe to, like you said, to network or just meet different people. So I literally just reached out to people from my past that I had come across.
Mm-hmm.
Like the very first guy was a Navy SEAL that I had come across. Like this guy, an author, just kind of these random, random people that you meet along the way. And I was listening back to some of those conversations, and I was like, I don't know if I really had any goal with that. More, it was kind of just to talk to these people. And
Mm-hmm.
then as I was probably 15 or 20 in, I kind of saw the conversation shift a little bit to where it's like, all right, I can maybe see this, like the direction of it going a different way, or see like there's some kind of idea behind it. And then I'm only, like I said to you, 55 in, but I'm like, all right, do I have to turn this into a business, or can I just still have this be something that I can, use as a networking tool? So I'm experiencing the same exact wave that you just said.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely was like it came in chunks where you're like, there's moments in time where you're like, shit, I'm gonna be the next big podcaster, and this is gonna be a huge show, and this and that. And you're like, that's great. And you have this moment where you're like, why the fuck am I doing this? Like, who's listening to this? Why am I even doing any of this? You have that moment of like, I'm hanging it up. This is stupid. Why am I doing this? And then you look back, like I've done that a couple times where I'll scroll back through the Instagram. Or I did it today. It popped up as a memory. Was like, hey, this company's now huge. Like they're guaranteed they will sell to like one of the big, you know, food companies. They will get bought out by the, like. I'm like, that was fucking awesome. That I was their first podcast interview. They're going to continue to grow, and that is amazing. And I've had that experience. So it's like I really have sort of rode that. Like you go through a lot of those emotions throughout the
Wave of the emotions. Yeah.
exactly.
Did you ever was a goal of it to ever meet somebody that you thought maybe serendipitously, if that's a word, that you would just meet somebody who was doing something cool and you would start your own thing with them? Did that ever cross your mind?
Honestly, no, but I've
Okay.
now like as I think I thought of all these people as like potential collaborators in some way. Like I never was. I don't think I ever set out was like, okay, I'm looking for a co-founder. I'm looking for X, Y, and Z. But since I've done that, I've you know made T-shirts with one of the guys who I interviewed. I've done soccer jerseys with the guy that I interviewed. I've leveraged the guy who does. He's an artist. He just got hired by North Face. Like he did some designs from. So I'm like there's people that I've interviewed that I've now done future creative projects with and like use them as collaborators.
Hmm.
So it was not a thought of mine, but it was like, holy shit, okay, now I have this like 127 episodes worth of people that I've interacted with that I'm like, okay, if I were to write a book, I could go to these 6 people. If I wanted photography, I could go to these 4 people. If I wanted to start a CPG product, I could go to these 8 people. Like that I did not think of when I started it, but as I look back on it now, I'm like, shit, that's like it's a pretty interesting network of, you know, characters.
Oh yeah, dude, it 100% is. That was interesting what you're saying though. That once you stopped for a couple weeks though, you kind of lost the momentum.
Mm-hmm.
And then because just listening to that episode, you were like, you almost, in the, I don't mean this in a bad way at all, but you sounded defeated a little bit. You're like, I
Yeah.
just
Oh
don't
yeah.
know
You're
what
like, it's a
I just
point of,
don't know what the direction is that I'm going with
right.
this thing. And then, yeah, but thing is though, you could always come back to it though, if you actually wanted to.
Yeah. I
Um,
think that's like a true in a lot of creative projects, especially where you're like, you start off with such like grand ambitions and you're like motivated by just like the big shiny toy at the end. And then you get in like the grind of the day to day and you're like, fuck, this is a lot of
mhm.
work to make it happen. And you start to question, like, why am I doing this? What's the point? But yeah, when you take your foot off the gas, it is hard to get back on when it's so much work and it's like you're kind of constantly chasing it. So that, like, especially for you, my advice like would be like build your. I think that was like the biggest struggle for me was honestly like building the process that made it sustainable. Like at a certain point, I could do it if things are going good, but it's like okay, if you have a vacation and then you have a big week of work and then you have somebody's birthday party after that, it's like those things start stacking up and now all of a sudden you're trying to like squeeze this in and you're not sleeping and you're. And so it was building a process that like if I could do it all over again would let me keep it more sustainable. Or maybe instead of every week I did it every 2 weeks and maybe that makes it easier to do. Like I think looking back, like the creative side I loved, but the process and like the intricacies of that are hard, and you're like managing that would be the thing that I would change. That I think I'd still be doing it if I had built a process that was like I could keep up with.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause you have to have some kind of guardrail. Yeah. Like you're saying, you have to have some kind of guardrails around it unless, or you'll just stop doing it.
Right.
So like, that's what I've experienced the last couple of weeks, but anyway, but you're doing something a little bit newer now, right? It's with the halftime heroes.
Yeah. So it's
What is
called
that? Yeah. What is that?
Halftime Heroes. I've been like noodling on this idea really since I ended Destination Different. Um, and as I came to the end of that, I had interviewed a handful of people that were all kind of like sports adjacent. Obviously I played sports in college, grew up a massive like Boston sports fan, consume Sports Center, consume, how's that like I'm just constantly like intaking sports content and I just thought, some of these people that I interviewed were really fascinating to kind of hear these like auxiliary sports stories of people that are like, building around their sports, their love of sports. Um, and so my idea is to kind of launch this new show that's still podcast, but probably more like YouTube, like video centric as well. That tells the stories of these sports creators, sports characters, and does it in a way that it's like a sports show. The way I've kind of been describing it, it's like it's a sports show for sports fans about sports creators. Like that's kind of like the gist of it. Um, and so I'm working to get that off the ground in early next year. I'm kind of laying the foundation for some of that stuff now. And after having done a show for 2.5 years, I'm like trying to really take some of the learnings that I had from that and apply them to this, where I'm better set up and really have like a clearer vision and target audience and all of that for this new show.
Hmm. So, what are some of the other learnings other than having some kind of like cadence around when you're going to do it, or and those kinds of things? Is there anything else that comes to mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think one, I know with the last show, and it's hard not to be focused on growth when you're doing something like this. I'm sure when you release episodes, you're like, okay, how many listens did this get? How many new subscribers am I gaining
Oh
on
yeah.
X, Y, and Z? It's just hard not to like do that. Um, and I spent so much time in the production element of it that it was like 90% of my time was in the lead up to the episode ever launching. It was like the sourcing of the guests, the recording, the editing, the like actually, formatting the descriptions, everything that like went into like the setup of the episode. Then the episode would come out, I'd post one thing on social media and it'd be gone. I was on to the next week trying to get the next episode going. And so it's probably like 95/5 in terms of like production and distribution of the content. So for me, as I think about this new show, I want to get that closer to, maybe it's never going to be 50/50, but the the product is obviously very important, but then how do you actually like tell people about it is the other thing. Like I was never, you got to be constantly pushing this thing for people to listen and to grow your audience and to put it in front of people. So for me, I'm really trying to think a lot more about how I distribute it as much as I do like the actual production of it.
I'm in the same exact boat. Yeah, because
Yeah.
you spend so much time, take so much pride in like looking up every part of this person's life,
Yep.
recording it, and then it goes 2 weeks and I don't even put out anything on Instagram or
Right.
whatever. It's like, dude, what? I don't know. I mean, then it goes back to, I guess, what do you want it to be? Do you want to just be a library of conversations you have, or do you actually want to turn it into something?
Right.
So then, in terms of your work, then, because you're still with the Boston Beer Company.
Yep. Yeah. Still with
Okay.
Boston Beer Company. Yep.
Okay. So then how is that still a creative job per se? Like, does that fill your,
Yeah. It
the
definitely
creative itch
fills
a little
my
bit?
definitely fills my creative itch, and like it's a very creative job. I mean, doing I'm looking at packaging design. I'm working on advertising. That's, you're working on social ads. Like you're doing all this stuff that is probably training me to how to. A podcast is no different than a packaged beer brand. Like, it's at the end of the day, you're trying to sell something to other people and get them to pay attention to it or buy it or listen to it or whatever that is. Uh, so I learn a lot and it's a lot of creative things, but there's something about creating something for yourself versus like advertising and marketing a product that you know you, is my job. And so I don't know. I think there's something about creating like I have always had this of wanting to create something that's like mine that I own. I touch own every piece of the creative process, and so that's why I'm always kind of still itching. Like, okay, what's that thing that I could create that's like outside of my day to day?
Yeah. I feel like if you like you try a ton of different things, I mean, you're almost just honing in on your craft a little bit, right? I mean,
Yeah,
you did the podcast, you recorded 127 episodes, and now with Halftime Heroes, yeah, it's like you're like that. Maybe that was just the first edition of what could be,
right.
what could come of that. Yeah,
Yeah, I think it's it. Like I think about this too. I've now taken a couple swings. Like, I had done the same thing, the
yeah,
travel blog. I was like, I'm trying to same thing. I come into that and I'm like, oh, I'm going to be this famous travel blogger who gets to go around and tell all these amazing stories and, go and document in these amazing places. I did this newsletter that was basically an update on like the digital marketing world. And it was much more like B2B, but did that every day for 2.5 years. Like, there was like some of these things that you start to build the reps and I look back on some of those now and you're like, man, those are not great. But I've learned a lot. And even as I head into the next project, I'm sure I'll learn a lot through this. Um, and, it only takes one to hit that, you can really get things going. And so that's, I think my mindset now is like, how can I just get more at bats?
yeah. That's a an optimistic outlook, I would say.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I try to be. It's hard. I think you
Yeah.
go in waves with creative stuff. It's like some days you're like, I'm the worst piece of shit ever. I'm lazy. I haven't touched this in 2 weeks. And
Uh,
other days you're like, okay, well, I know there's something in this and I can keep pushing on it. So
yeah.
I try
Yeah,
and
dude. I
lean on
know.
the optimistic side.
Yeah. I was gonna say because that's what I was feeling the last. I don't know, man. I think it goes back to what you were saying, like just about the athlete and that like the lessons that come from that because it is something like this is something that you can control, right? It's like
Hmm.
you can't always control something maybe that's going on in your job or like you work in a corporation,
Right.
but if you're producing something every week, you can control that. You can control the reps. So when you don't do it, you're like,
It's only on
damn,
you.
dude, what am I? What am I doing? Like, am I just gonna quit? But
Yeah.
yeah,
Do
yeah,
you find with your show now, like I always found, and as I come into this halftime heroes thing, I'm trying to make more of an effort to incorporate more people in it. Like the podcast, it was just me. I did the production, I did everything, and it gets very lonely. But it's also like it's only you. There's no one to hold you accountable but yourself.
hmm
And I think about like, oh, we both played team sports. As I go into this new thing, I'm like, I liked the accountability of a coach, of another teammate being like getting on you if you weren't doing something. And so as I come into this, I'm trying to bring more people like into my world to keep me accountable. Of like, okay, I got a deadline with this guy to make these jerseys. I've got a deadline with this guy to get him a brief for the logo. Like it's helped me to bring more like I'm like this is I like team sports. I need to make this feel like more of a team sport in a way too.
yeah. What are you gonna do? Yeah, I know that was kind of a question for me because yeah, I totally feel that, and that's what it sometimes it gets lonely because it is just you, and you're like, all right, I didn't play golf or tennis or anything.
Right.
Like I played a team sport, and yeah, you always had somebody holding you accountable. With this, yeah, you can seek out other people like like you or just other people who have done it before, but
Yeah.
it's a little bit different, especially along the way in the day to day. But yeah, that's something that I think about actually too. I'm like, would I want to pull somebody else in? Is one of my buddies actually that I went to Seton Hall with is crushing it. Like he's crushing it and he has a co-founder, but he started this podcast with this other dude.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, they can hold each other accountable. They can, they're kind of building it together. And it's probably cooler to do it with somebody else, especially when you get there and you're not just on the
Right.
top of the mountain by yourself. But that's what I've thought about. Like, would I want to do it with somebody else, or would I just want to keep it me?
Yeah.
And I haven't really got an answer. And I don't know. I haven't really come to any kind of answer on that. But yeah,
And I
what would
mean, it
you
does
do
like
to?
I kind of thought about like it doesn't necessarily have to be a co-host, but it
Yeah,
could
just
be
somebody else.
like, I've kind of thought like, all right, in this new world, everything's going to be formatted like a sports show. So I'm like, I've got this guy that I know from college who he would do like fake announcements. Like you'd be coming home from the bar and he'd be like, coming back. He does the full like sports announcer calls. I'm like, okay, we're putting this guy in the show. If once a week he sends me a 1 minute video that's like his announcement for the show, that adds a dynamic. He becomes a character in the world, but also like he keeps me accountable because he's like, okay, where's like the next thing coming from? So like for you, I don't think you have to think about it necessarily being another co-host. It could just be like who's somebody I check in with, or like they send in their motivation every week, or they send in whatever. Um, that gives you another outlet to kind of
hmm
reach out to and keep going.
Yeah. No, that's interesting you say that because I actually interviewed Adam White. His name is. Have you ever heard of
Hmm.
him? The
No.
founder. He founded Front Office Sports, so the
Okay. Yep. Yeah.
sports
Yeah. Yeah.
publication, which is awesome. Like especially if you're on LinkedIn, you probably see it. But
Yep.
he said something similar because it sounded like they're putting out all this content, they're writing articles, and it's awesome. But he's like, how do we build franchises almost around personalities similar to
Hmm.
the Barstool because people
Yep.
relate to the personalities probably way more than they do to just like reading an article. You
Right.
read the article, then it's move on. But
Yeah. You have
versus
no idea who wrote that article.
yeah, versus you have the big cat or like
Yep.
guys like that people just gravitate to, and they have these huge followings. So yeah, that's interesting that you said that about your show. That would be a cool idea.
Yeah. So I'm like, okay, I know guys that do announcing. I got another guy. He's a professional referee now. So I'm like, all right, is there a way that I could incorporate a referee in the show? And it's like maybe he's giving guys yellow cards or he's doing something silly, but it's like could just be like we film one thing one day and that's it, or it could be like okay, you're the ref in the show and you give the ruling on whatever the rules warning or whatever.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm trying to think about that more as I come into this new world of like how can I make this feel a little bit more like the team sport that I grew up with.
Yeah, no, yeah, 100%. What do you think about the virtual thing versus in person? Because I've done a few of them. Did you do any episodes in person when you?
I literally think I did one in person and it went terribly. I like didn't have
Really?
the tech to do it. It was like we're trying to share a mic. We've got two things going. I'm recording like side content on my phone. It just felt awkward. But also I think the guest that I had to do that was also not like I didn't have a great game plan for that. Um, I think eventually I'd like to get to a place where I could do things in person, it just adds such a layer of complexity that if I can, I think my first goal is to find a way to do it where it feels really cool in a virtual environment and I can package it in a way that feels like high end and unique to watch and not just like, what I was doing for 2.5 years. So that's what I'm trying to think about. But eventually I'd like to get a place where it's like, okay, there's live elements or there's, I'm doing things in person. But I think for the time being, just for like knowing me, knowing I have another job, knowing that I have all this complexity, like keeping it remote, I think will keep it easier for the
Yeah.
short term.
No, for sure. How are you managing your time? Or and how did you manage your time with the podcast? Like that's something for me. It's
Very good question.
all over the place, dude.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, I did at certain point actually change the release date. Like it used to, it always would drop. It dropped on Wednesdays for the first like year and a half of the show, and then I kind of found that like I wouldn't really touch it too much over the weekend, or I'd maybe like do a lot of like legwork to like set up future guests on the weekend. But then like the editing really came in on like Monday and Tuesday, and I was always scrambling to get it out Wednesday. So I eventually moved it to Thursday to give myself an extra day of like the week to get it in, which maybe was just a mind fuck for myself, but it seemed to work. Um, but yeah, it was a lot of I would do I would try and record like intros and outros in the mornings, like get up early and just like knock those out. And then for some reason nights were always like when I would actually like put the pieces together, edit it, try and do like little social cuts and would do that like after work hours at night. But yeah, it was a grind for sure.
So we both just enjoy punishing ourselves by
Torture. Yep.
just torturing yourself with trying to figure out
Yeah.
when to put it out there.
That's where I keep going
Um,
back to like, okay, if I had a system that was like, all right, I'm going to take this day off from work and I'm going to try and schedule 5 interviews on a Sunday or on a Friday or something, like just like batch record and edit them all together, in one day. Like, I don't know if that would be better, but I did
I
always
just
think about like, is there a way that I could have made this get further ahead, made this easier on myself?
I was really thinking about that too. I'm like, am I really going to take a PTO day to
Yeah.
edit a full thing?
I
I
never
don't
did
know,
it, but
but
I do. I have now in this new world. I'm like, man, if I just took a week off from work and like said to people, I'm offline, do not bother me, do not talk to me, and I just like went all in for 5 days on a creative project, like I feel like you could make some pretty good progress if I gave myself enough lead time.
oh yeah. Well, so isn't that kind of the point though? You know what I mean? Like, isn't that like you're going after these creative projects and you ultimately want to make it your full time thing? I, there's really no question in that, but it's like, all right, you're working this job that you have to squeeze in something that, and of course, yeah, for you,
Yeah,
you have a kid now. I'm engaged, I have a house, all this stuff. So it's like you have responsibilities, but how can you incorporate more of that or make that the real time or full thing at some point?
yeah. I mean, I've started like I've told this to a couple people. Like when I started doing the travel thing, I I quit my job. I was like, I'm gonna go travel. This is what you need to do. I gotta go like I'm gonna go all in on this. And then I had so much time that I wasn't like using my time well. Like I was like your effort expands to the time you have. And so I was like bullshitting around, doing all this stuff. So I do think like having a job helps in that respect of like, all right, if you've got 5 tight hours a week to put into it and that's all you've got, like that's better than 20 kind of half-assed hours. So that I've been trying to think about. And then a job gives you a lot of safety in terms of like paycheck, benefits, all that stuff. And I've now been trying to think about like, all right, do I square off $1,000 a month that goes towards my creative project? Like, what can I budget towards? Hey, maybe I use this paycheck from my day job to help actually like fund and grow my side hustle to the point where it could maybe like scale up. So I did not think about that for my prior projects, and I'm now trying to think about that. Like,
Yeah,
can I think about this as like an investment in what I'm doing? My day job is just an investment into how I'm like gonna eventually grow this to take over that source of income.
sure. It's tough to shift that mindset though, isn't it?
Yeah, it
It's
is.
tough to, yeah, because there was one guy J.R. Butler, who's in Boston.
Hmm.
I think I on the phone when we talked
Yeah,
before.
yeah, yeah.
I talked about him, but yeah, he runs this really interesting company where he's connecting athletes and veterans to I think different sales jobs. Like he trains them up and
Yep.
then he gets them hired. But he was basically like, yeah, I had this sales job, I saved up, and then I just burned the boats.
Right.
He's like, burned the boats and I went for it. And you always hear about that and it sounds
Yep.
so great. And then you're like, all right, but then how am I going to pay for the rest of my like?
The rest of
How
my
am I going to?
life and the things that I
Yeah,
like,
but
and yeah,
maybe it's like, yeah, I don't know. Maybe that's a soft mindset. Maybe that's what it takes is like people that are just super extreme. But it's also you have to know yourself
yeah.
a little bit
And I
too, and
think
that
I know
makes sense.
myself where I'm
Yeah,
like, I am so I'm a and maybe this just is a money thing, and I don't know if that's where it all stems from, but like I'm a pretty budget conscious guy. Like I don't spend a lot of myself. I don't like buy nice things, but I even at work, like in managing our work budget, I'm like super kind of just like keep an eye on things. I don't overspend, but I think it translates into my like I on the podcast. I don't think I spent $1 outside of buying, the mic and whatever to set it up. I think there's probably an in between of like maybe I could spend $500 on an editor who's going to cut up 12 clips for me and it's going to save me 5 hours of headache of trying to do it. And that actually helps the podcast in the long run. It helps me mentally be able to feel like I can keep doing it. So I'm starting to think that way a little bit more of like, is there an in between where I can invest in this actually like treat it like a business and hey, this is startup cash to actually get this thing off the ground and grow it and really think about it that way of like what's my return on the $500 that I'm spending for an editor or whatever. Like I did not think about that on any of my prior projects, but maybe as I head into this new one, it's something that I want to think about of like what's the return on this spend to save me time, to save me money, to help grow the show, whatever it is. Uh, that's something I'm definitely thinking about.
yeah. No, that's great because I've same thing for me. Yeah, I'm like, dude, I don't want to spend $1,000 or
Right.
something for somebody to cut this up. I'll just grind through it on Riverside,
Yeah.
and then the time aspect comes into it. Yeah, so there's
Right.
just a constant back and forth, but
Yeah.
it's you know what,
And then I
man, I
battle
think it's
too because
just
I'm like, well, I know I'm not as good as this as somebody else might be.
yeah,
Like maybe they
for
can do a
sure.
better job and I can focus on the things that I'm good at. And so
Yeah, man.
it's a
Yeah,
constant, that's a battle I've struggled in all these
yeah,
projects.
yeah. So people who are listening to this who don't have a podcast are probably like, all right, why am I still listening? But
Yeah.
what so we'll start to wind down here, man. So thanks for hopping on. This is
Yeah, of
awesome.
course.
How'd you come up with the stay weird?
To stay weird. That was it was early on in the show. I don't know if I used that throughout the entirety of the thing. Um, but the whole idea was like, okay, can I start all of these people I had met was this movement to like do something that was unconventional, a little bit outside the box. And the people that I like have a little bit, they're not, straight cookie cutter types of people. And so I don't know, I thought that was like a nice way to put a bow on the show of like these are people that are like stepping outside the box. They're thinking a little bit weird. They're thinking a little bit different. Um, and so that somehow became the sign off early on in the show was like, hey, just stay weird. Um, and yeah, that was the hook for kind of summing up the show.
I think it was a good summation. Yeah, because there's cast of characters that you would have on there. But
Exactly. When I think about it, I'm like, what a hodgepodge crew like of people this was. Uh, And I don't know if now that you say that out loud, like I don't know if I embraced that enough. Like I think I actually could have like pushed on that even harder just in like the branding of the show. Like, hey, this is for, this show is for the weirdos who are trying to like get out and make something of themselves. Like I think I could have leaned into that even further than I did.
hmm, yeah, it's interesting you say that.
Like I think
What do you
as
mean by what do you mean by that? Like
as I
you
like I
you
mean I
thought it was
work in like
too
marketing
yeah
and branding. I've kind of done all these like side projects. I think what I was lacking with the podcast, with my travel blog, with some of these things is like a unifying kind of who is the person who's going to consume this, and like why is this for them? And having a rallying cry like that like gives you something powerful that people will latch onto, and like that then gets them to share the show, to get to participate in what you're doing. And when it's sort of just like wallpaper on the end, I don't know, I don't think it had the same like stickiness to it as if I would have been like, hey, this is for, if you're a normal 9 to 5, you like your accounting job and sitting at your desk, this show is not for you. Like it didn't give any sort of like tension point
Mm,
where I think
yeah.
if I pushed on it a little bit more, it then carves out like, oh, that's me. I'm the guy who I always am trying new stuff. I want to create something for myself. Uh, I think it would have given a little bit more stickiness and like tension to who the show was for and who it was not for.
So you think? So you're saying you don't think you were enough of you in the project in the podcast? Is that kind of it a little bit, or I mean, because
I
you were, if you listen, like you're definitely, you start off the show with what is it, the airline
Yeah,
or
the like
airplane
airline pilot, like,
pilot.
ladies and gentlemen, this is
Yeah,
your
so it's
captain speaking.
definitely,
Yeah,
yeah,
right.
it's definitely weird,
Yeah,
which is good, but
right.
it
I
sounds
don't.
like you're saying you feel like there was still some in there that you're like,
I
I
think it
could,
was. I think it was that, and I think it like I think I could have pushed it harder. I think you look at the people who make it in creating content, who make it in brand, like they stand above for one reason or another. And I don't know if I ever found like what my hook was that was bringing people in. Like, could it have been that hey, I'm going to be weird and this show is going to be weird and off the rails, and that's what the thing is? Could it just be that I am researching these people better than anybody else on the internet, and that's what brings people in? Is it that I'm telling stories better or getting more interesting guests? Like, I don't think I ever had that clear hook. Uh, and so I don't know if it was as much me personally that I wasn't myself or wasn't anything like that, but I think it was, I didn't quite pick a lane of like, here's where I want this thing to land.
yeah. Wait, so I'm looking up this thing real quick because I saw something really similar to that today. Here, oh, here's it is. This guy, Shane Parrish on Twitter. You
Mm-hmm.
familiar with him?
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So he posted this. He's like, "You're born with certain core traits. Fighting them is like being a sprinter forced to run a marathon. Exhausting and futile, but these limitations can become your biggest advantage." And
Right.
then he goes down, like lists all these things. He's like, the introvert's edge in sales, don't fake extrovert energy,
Yeah.
win through deep research and last relationships while others work the room. Searching for a transaction, you could build long-term relationships. And then he gives a couple more examples. So that's really interesting. Yeah, because it's
Like
something
you
that
got
I'm
to
thinking
think,
about
okay,
too.
like what
Yeah.
made you good as a baseball player? Like what made you great?
Well, it's the things that I eventually got away from
Yeah.
that became became my demise. Like, yeah, there were certain things, and then you kind of forget what those are at one point.
Right.
But
It's hard.
yeah, that's a really good question though.
Because like I think about like playing soccer, like I'm not a goal scorer. I'm not a super creative, going forward, attacking guy, but I worked really hard. I was very athletic. I was a good communicator and organizer, and I was tough. I was gonna win, scrappy battles, things like that. And when you know like what you are as a player, it makes it a lot easier. Like, my freshman year, I was playing on the wing and I'm trying to be like fast guy going up and down, doing tricks and stuff. I'm like, I never was that guy. And so then when you find like, okay, this is my identity as a player, it makes it very easy to play because you're like, I know I'm going to go out and do this job. My job was to defend the best guy. It was to be tough. It was to make his life hard. And that was my job. Like, I think as I think about transitioning into work or whatever you're doing, like knowing what you're best at and not trying to do the stuff that you're not is like where I now am trying to focus of like, okay, what am I really great at as a creator, as a whatever, and how can I lean into just like owning that identity?
Dude, I love that. Yeah, because it's like, yeah, and I'm trying to think, somebody else was talking about that too. Yeah, it's like stick to what you're good at. I don't know. I mean, because it's easy to get away from that at times.
Right.
Yeah, and that's why it would probably be or be beneficial to have maybe somebody like you're talking about hold you accountable a little bit.
Yep.
But it also comes down to that the self awareness thing, to where it's like, all right,
Yeah.
dude, if you're so smart but you're unhappy with at your job or like these certain things, it's like, are you really that smart? Or why
Right.
can't you
Yeah. Yeah.
why can't you figure it out? But
Yep.
yeah, lean into what you're good at. So cool, man. Ryan, thanks, dude. I appreciate you taking the time.
Of
I mean, it was
course. Yeah.
cool. Yeah, it was fun just researching. Yeah, because we were put in touch through a guy on Twitter that
Yep.
George Boyd. So thanks, George. But
Shout out George putting
yeah,
us
man.
together. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it's
But it's
crazy. Like you're like it makes you appreciate the power of the internet, where you're like you meet somebody, then they patch you into somebody else, and it is really what
it's
I have grown to appreciate with like just being on the internet all the time.
totally, which is there's pros and cons to being on the internet all the
Yeah.
time for sure. Yeah, because I'm might spend too much on time or on Twitter at times. But I guess what I was going to say was, yeah, he introduced your story, I think, through Halftime Heroes.
Hmm.
But then just looking back through your, like, that's what I was curious to hear about you. 127 episodes over 3 years. I mean,
Yeah.
that's so much time just doing this, just appreciating the time that goes into it. It's like, dude, good for you. Yeah.
Well, I
So
appreciate it. Yeah.
best of luck in the next endeavor here. Yeah.
Well, hopefully we get this next one off the ground and have another 3 years. Hopefully I make it past. Everything seems to die at the 2.5, 3 year mark. I got to figure out a way to make it past that. But I
Oh
think this
man.
one, this
Yeah.
maybe is the one.
Yeah, dude, keep it going, man. And I'll be checking in and supporting you for sure. If anybody's listening in, just give a quick shout out to your new stuff or your old stuff if you like.
Yeah, yeah. If
Yeah.
you're tuning in, follow Team Halftime Heroes on Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok. That's where we're gonna be hopefully blowing this thing up.
Love it. Go check it out. Go follow it. Ryan,
Awesome. Thanks,
thanks
Joe.
a lot, man.
Appreciate it.
You got it, brother. All right, thanks.